to none, we're the class of 21. Borrowing that line from long, long ago in a class of 81 in North Carolina. Some classes are known by the traits, the rowdy class. Some are known by their antics. My high school class, it was the first year, our junior year. My high school, we sat freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors. There's a lot of symbolism as your 4 years where you sit. And so at the opening assembly, the first day of school, and we're seated by our class. And we've moved over now to the other side, the upperclassmen side. And our behavior was less than ideal. And I remember our principal, Mr. Boss, just looked over us and said, "Juniors, leave." Of course, we cheered and we left and went on to our own rooms. And so we were known as the class. We got kicked out of opening assembly our junior year. Some people are known for that. It was a seminary class where it was kind of a sad situation. During Greek school, they had some disagreements, and that's a time in the class in seminary often bonds, and they never did because of that. And one of the classmates just said, "We're the broken class. We never connect." It's not a sad thing. Some classes are known as being a charmed class. Particular classes at West Point that are known as the class the stars fell on. Those that were at West Point at a certain time, and then there was a certain place in their career when the First World War and then the Second World War broke out. And so a large percentage of those classes became generals. The circumstances dictated. They were charmed in that sense. Last year, the class of 2020 led worship in July, and as part of my charge to them, I said, "You will always be known as the Corona class." That is part of any high school, college. The class of 2020 will always be known as the Corona class. I've pondered the class of 21. It's a class that has been shaped by the pandemic, the way it impacted the junior year and the senior year. The pandemic will be part of your story. However, for you, it will be, despite the pandemic, we did X. Or we did it Y this way, not the usual way. No, we never got to do Z. You're on the front end of life after the pandemic. Maybe a little overdramatic to say you are launched into an uncertain time. We're getting back on our feet on new ground, and you are part of the group that will launch it. If 2020 is known as the Corona class, finally came to me last night, 21, to me it is the impacted class. The impacted class. Yes, today, speaking to the seniors, and this sounds a little bit like a graduation speech, a charge, but it's their moment in the sun. And to them, I want to offer 3 stories of courage, wisdom, and honor. Our first story, our first lesson, comes from the story of Ruth. And briefly, some of you are already familiar with this. I preached on it last summer. Don't know how many extensive notes that you took. But anyway, briefly, the story of Ruth is a man named Elimelech who took his wife Naomi and 2 sons from the land of the Hebrews to the land of Moab. Just crossing over maybe 40 miles away, but that's a big deal in those days. Along the way, the sons married women of Moab, Ruth and Orpah. Then Elimelech dies, and the sons die, and there is no grandchildren, no heirs to these 2 sons. And Naomi returns to her hometown, going back to her people, and she calls her daughter-in-law, "Love y'all, but you need to go to your own people to see what you can find here." And Orpah, after some debate, does go back. But Ruth chooses to stay. She's determined to go with Ruth. And essentially, Ruth becomes the breadwinner, quite literally. She becomes a gleaner in the grain fields. And the custom was those who needed help could come after the harvesters. And whatever was dropped, they could pick up. And in fact, Scripture says, don't go too deep into your corners. Leave that for the gleaners. It was, to a degree, a social safety net of that time. She worked in the field that belonged to Boaz, who is a distant cousin to her late husband. In the end, she and Boaz fall in love. They face obstacles, but it all comes to pass, and they marry. And a descendant of hers is David and Jesus. She's mentioned in the family tree of Jesus. Ruth showed in her actions courage, wisdom, and honor. She represents a call to courage for our class of 21 and really for all of us. Courage to stick with someone connected to you despite the odds. The courage to care for the vulnerable. The courage to step out. Ruth left all that was familiar to her. And she became a sojourner in a foreign land. Maybe that last example, in some respects, is the most real for the class of 21. This time you will be leaving home, and even if you go to school from home, you create really a totally new world with the purpose of leaving home. And the decisions you make at this time increasingly will be your own. And then we have the story of Esther. This is several hundred years later. Much has happened in the history of the Hebrew people. At one point, they were conquered by Babylon, and they were moved in group to the land of Babylon, modern-day Iraq. But then Iran, Persia, but modern-day Iran, beats Iraq. And the people are allowed to go back to their homes, and many do. But they're also allowed to settle elsewhere in the empire, the Persian Empire. That's what has happened. Esther is part of the Hebrew community in Susa, the capital. Now, she is orphaned. And an older cousin, maybe a first cousin to her father, is her guardian. That's Mordecai. Now, it's a very long story, but in the end, she ends up essentially being a chief girlfriend, or the chief girlfriend, a queen to the king of Persia. Now, she has her quarters, and she only visits when he calls for her. Now, her cousin, Mordecai, at first tells her, don't talk about your background when you're in that contest, that beauty contest, to become queen. And over time, there's a bad guy named Haman who launches a plot to kill the Jews. And then Mordecai says, this is the time to appeal on behalf of your people. And she says, well, I've not been summoned. And if the king, she goes in without permission, and the king is having a bad hair day, it could cost her her life. And that's the point when Mordecai says, you have an opportunity. Maybe this is why you are queen. In the end, she does speak with the king. She finds favor with him. And in the end, Esther saves her people. She showed wisdom and courage and honor. Wisdom, as she knew when to act, how to act, has 3 days of prayer even before she goes in to see the king. For the class of 21, you will need wisdom. You will be in challenging places, discerning your next steps, dealing with people. Not only in your education setting, you may be working a part-time job. I worked in high school at Sears, where Americans, at least now, used to shop for gifts of value. And that was quite a classroom. Not only working with the public, but working with co-workers. And just being the kid, just doing your job and listening and seeing a lot. and discerning the way forward. It only gets more interesting. You will need wisdom. And then we have our story of Mary several hundred years later. She is a teenager. And imagine her just basically doing her chores. When the angel comes to her, I think it maybe gathering the water, getting the water, bringing it back home was one of her jobs. I think of it as that. In the same way, a young girl today might be told to clean her room, and she's doing it, or she's doing trash, or something like that. And then the angel visits her. Mary is descended from King David, and that was 900 years ago. And Ruth is in her family tree as well. And she's given the opportunity to be the mother of the Messiah. And she says yes. She will honor her responsibility. She will bear the Messiah. She will raise him, nurture him, not understand him at times, and then she will lose him to a painful and shameful death. She has no idea to what she's getting herself, but she says yes. She chose honor, and it took wisdom and courage. For the class of 21, it's a call in life to honor your commitments and ideals. Not sure when these opportunities, moments will come to act on them. But then, lo and behold, they will be there. It's been said, you either define the moment, or the moment will define you. Honor your vision for your life over your fears. We have courage, wisdom, and honor in the person of Jesus Christ. He had the courage to do the miracles and to heal at the times when he did, and to have the conversations that he did. He went into some very unusual places. Jesus Christ showed wisdom and responded well. He got into some tight places, and it was often not do the miracle to get yourself out. It was through a prudent response, an answer that spoke to the heart of the situation. It was through that wisdom that Jesus won the day. I would say statistically it was much more that case. It was how he responded. Jesus Christ showed honor. Even when he said, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but thine be done. For the class of 21, it's a challenge to keep Jesus Christ as your North Star. Keep seeking and finding and founding. And finding your foundation in him. Recently, I should say, the other week, I quoted lines from a song, the class of 57, written but it had been 15 years after graduation. The reunion, that song and other reunion-themed songs speak to the challenges that face the class, and often a reminder that every class faces the challenge. We're not often as unique as we think we are. But still, it is your challenge going forward as the impacted class. You're the best, second to none. You're the class of 21. You are the impacted class.